let's talk about something most people get completely wrong when dealing with avoidant individuals, especially in romantic relationships. It's the instinct to chase. You get ignored, you feel the emotional distance, and you panic. So what do? You reach out. You over-explain. You beg for clarity. You send that one last text thinking, if they just understand how I feel, they'll come back. But here's the true thing. With the more emotionally available you become to an avoidant, the more they shut down Og. Not because they don't care. Not because you're not enough, but because emotional intensity feels like a threat to their autonomy. And autonomy, for an avoidant, is everything. So, what's the antidote? Reclaim your emotional power. That's the first trigger. That's the first step toward pulling them back in. Not by force, but by energy. I want you to hear this clearly. You avoidants are not attracted to closeness. They're magnetized by space. If you want them to reconnect, the first and most effective move is to stop making yourself emotionally available. You need to become the version of you that no longer waits, that no longer needs them to respond for you to feel valid, that no longer tries to fix the connection through over-communication. Now, this isn't about game playing. It's about understanding the deep psychological wiring of someone with an avoidant attachment style. These people grew up equating closeness with pressure, somewhere in their early relationships. Maybe with a parent, maybe through emotional neglect. They learned that vulnerability comes at a cost. So they pull away the moment things feel emotionally saturated. The moment you express too much, too fast, they disappear. Why? Because that expression, no matter how honest, overwhelms their system. They don't process emotion like you do. They process it through withdrawal. And here's the twist when you do the same. When you withdraw not out of anger, but out of alignment, you become emotionally safe again in their eyes' view. Think about it like this. If you stop showing up for them emotionally, their subconscious starts to notice the absence. It creates space for desire to rebuild. But if you're always emotionally present, they never get the chance to wonder about you. There's no mystery. There's no emotional vacuum that calls them forward. They can't reconnect because, in their mind, they never disconnected. You were always there. You filled in the silence for them. You did the work of both people. So how do you reclaim that power? Start by noticing where you've been emotionally overextending. Every time you reread old messages, every time you stalk their social media, every time you mentally replay the last conversation, you're feeding attachment, not the solution. You need to shift that focus back inward. Take that energy and invest it into things that recenter you. Your purpose, your routine, your physical body, your creative drive. Not to distract yourself, but to rebuild the self that existed before the relationship became all-consuming. And here's the psychology behind why this works. When you remove the emotional supply from the avoidant, they are forced to regulate their own emotions. That's when they feel your absence. That's when they begin to process the connection. Not from a place of panic, but from reflective distancy. Your detachment becomes a mirror. It reflects their inner conflict. They begin to miss not the version of you that begged, but the version of you that knew your worth even when they couldn't validate it. There's also a deeper, almost philosophical element to this. Emotional power doesn't come from having control over someone else. It comes from having control over your reaction to someone else. The moment you stop reacting to the avoidance distance, you break the dynamic. You're no longer part of their emotional script, and that shift is unsettling for them, but also intriguing. Suddenly, you're not the predictable partner anymore. You're not emotionally available on demand. That unpredictability pulls them in. So next time your instinct is to reach out, pause, breathe. Ask yourself, am I giving because I want to, or because I'm afraid of losing them? If it's fear, pull back. Not to punish them, but to protect your peace. Because here's the truth, the most powerful trigger for reconnection isn't pleading, chasing, or explaining. It's goob your silence, your shift, and your self-respectable. Let them feel your absence. Not as rejection, but as recalibration. When you become the version of yourself that doesn't need them to come back, that's exactly when they'll start looking for you again. And remember this, because your value doesn't increase by being available. It shines when you're missed. And let's get into something that feels completely counterintuitive when someone you care about pulls away. Silence. The moment an avoidant goes cold, most people go warm. You double down. You check in. You send a soft message, hoping it doesn't come across as needy. You justify reaching out by telling yourself it's just communication. But what you're actually doing, psychologically, is trying to regulate your own anxiety through their presence. And for an avoidant, that pressure, even if it's subtle, feels like emotional invasion. It doesn't bring them closer. It pushes them further away. Here's the hard truth, when someone with an avoidant attachment style pulls away, your silence speaks louder than any words ever could. Not because you're playing a game, but because silence restores equilibrium in the dynamic. Avoidants aren't wired to process connection through intensity. They process through distance. And when you give them that distance without resistance, you break the pattern that keeps you stuck. See, we've all been taught that love is expressed through action. Calls, messages, effort. And yes, that's true for secure relationships. But in avoidant dynamics, the rules flip. For them, space equals safety. The moment things feel too emotional, they start feeling trapped. Not because you did something wrong, but because intimacy unconsciously triggers their fear of being engulfed, controlled, or expected to give more than they can. So when you lean in, they lean out. But when you lean out, their nervous system starts to settle. Your absence doesn't threaten them. It gives them the air they didn't know they needed. And more importantly, it creates a contrast. It shows them what life feels like goo without your emotional energy filling the space. That's where the real shift happens. Most people misunderstand silence. They think silence is passive. They think silence is weakness. But in this context, silence is strategy. It's boundary. It's self-respect. It's your way of saying, I am not here to chase someone who isn't emotionally present. I am here to hold space for myself. And that space becomes magnetic, because now, instead of managing your energy, they're left to sit with their own. And when they do, a few things begin to unfold. First, they notice your absence, not just physically, but emotionally. The support you used to offer, the validation they used to silently depend on, the access to your warmth. It's gone, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Second, they start asking questions. Why haven't they reached out? Are they over it? Did I misread their feelings? These questions trigger reflection. And avoidants, while often emotionally guarded, do think. They analyze. They don't usually respond in the moment, but in silence they process. They replay. And eventually, if the connection meant something, they start to miss you. Not because you reminded them, but because you didn't. Now let's zoom out for a second. There's a deeper philosophical principle here. What you don't say often carries more weight than what you dog. Human beings are meaning makers. When something goes unsaid, we assign meaning to the silence. And when someone used to be present suddenly isn't, we begin to wonder why. That wondering That uncertainty is the opening. It creates emotional friction, and friction can lead to re-engagement. But, and this is key, your silence only holds power if it's rooted in self-worth, not in strategy. If you're going silent just to get a reaction, they'll feel the manipulation. If you're going silent because you've reclaimed your emotional boundaries, they'll feel the shift in energy. One repels, the other attracts. So how do you apply this? When they go silent, match it, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Do not reach out. Do not ask for closure. Do not send reminders of your love or pain. Let the silence say, I see your withdrawal, and I honor it by withdrawing too. That creates mutual space. And in that space, two things happen. They feel the consequence of emotional distance, and you remember who you are outside of the dynamica. You might be thinking, but what if they never come back? And here's the most empowering part. That's not your job to control. Your job isn't to manipulate their return. It's to recenter yourself. Because silence isn't about getting them back. It's about getting you back. So the next time the urge to break the silence kicks in, ask yourself, am I trying to regulate their response? Or am I holding space for mine? That question alone can change the entire trajectory of your healing. You don't need to explain yourself to be understood. You don't need to remind them of your worth. Let your absence speak. Let the silence breathe. And let the space between you do what constant words never could. Because sometimes the loudest way to be heard is to say absolutely nothing. One of the most powerful ways to trigger an avoidant to reconnect with you isn't by doing more. It's by shifting your energy so quietly, so subtly, that they begin to feel your absence without you ever having to say a word. This is where most people get it completely wrong. They think that to reignite connection, they need to initiate some deep emotional conversation, offer reassurance, or remind the avoidant what they're missing. But here's the psychological truth. Because avoidants aren't pulled in by emotional pressure. They're pulled in by emotional contrast. And one of the deepest contrasts you can create is when you subtly show them that you've moved on, or are at least no longer emotionally dependent on them. This doesn't mean you fake being happy. It means you actually start pouring your energy into yourself. And as you shift from, what do they need from me, to what do I need from me, something incredible happens. You begin to disrupt the emotional pattern they've grown used to. Avoidants tend to keep emotional distance because it gives them a sense of control. When they know you're still emotionally tethered, even if you're not speaking, they feel safe continuing to disengage. Why? Because your emotional energy is still orbiting around them. You might not be texting, but they can feel it in your online activity, your subtle posts, your vibes. You're still available, still emotionally there. So when you genuinely start detaching, when you stop watching their stories, when your energy starts being redirected to new goals, new habits, maybe even new people, they feel that shift. And that's the trigger. That's the moment their subconscious gets activated, not out of love, but out of fear. Fear of losing the emotional supply they thought they could count on. Fear that the door they once kept slightly open might actually close. Let me be clear, you don't have to date someone new or post thirst traps to make this shift. This isn't about playing games. It's about changing your frequency. Emotional independence is the most powerful, non-verbal message you can send to an avoidant. It signals, you are no longer the center of my emotional world. And ironically, that's when they start wondering where they stand in yours. There's a psychological principle at play here. Perceived scarcity increases value. When someone senses they no longer have guaranteed access to you, they begin to reevaluate. You go from emotionally available to emotionally elusive. Not because you're trying to hurt them, but because you're finally choosing yourself. And self-prioritization has an energetic frequency people can feel, even through a screen, even in silence. That's when they start checking your stories, watching your moves, testing the waters with casual messages. You may not even notice it at first, but their energy shifts, because now they're curious again. Curious about your world without them in it. That curiosity is the seed of reconnection, and it doesn't grow when you beg. It grows when you evolve. Now, here's the philosophical depth most people overlook. This is not about making them come back. It's about understanding that as who you become when they pull away is what determines whether they're drawn back in. If you collapse, if you spiral, if you wait, nothing changes. But when you rise, when you reframe, when you focus on expansion, they feel it. The emotional dynamic is no longer them choosing to return. It becomes them catching up to where you've already gone. And if you're thinking, that sounds manipulative, pause right there. This isn't manipulation. This is liberation. You're not acting for their response. You're transforming because you're tired of being stuck in a cycle of emotional deprivation. And in doing so, you become the version of yourself that's no longer chasing connection. You are connection. You become magnetic, and magnets don't chase. They attract. So if you want to trigger that avoidant to reconnect, don't force it. Don't talk about it. Don't post about how unbothered you are. That's still about them. Just don't become unbothered. Start living in a way where their presence or absence no longer defines your emotional reality. And when you reach that place of grounded neutrality, you'll find that either they return or you outgrow the need for them to. Because the most powerful move isn't proving your worth to them. It's living like you already know it. Dizer. Let's talk about the moment you've been waiting for. When the avoidant finally reaches out. Maybe it's a casual, "Hey, how have you been?" or a vague reaction to your story. It might be subtle, almost meaningless on the surface. But to you, it's a sign. A signal that maybe, just maybe, they're ready to re-enter your life. And let's be honest, your nervous system lights up. Hope kicks in. Your heart races, your brain jumps 10 steps ahead, and everything in you wants to respond with warmth, clarity, maybe even a little emotional closure. But here's the trap, Dalzers. If you rush in with eagerness, you reset the entire dynamics. Right back to the one where you chase, they retreat, and nothing ever really changes.